Hello, I am Mike.
Hello, I am Lily. Welcome to English Podcast Flow.
Today we're going to talk about whether speaking fast actually makes you sound smarter. It's something I've definitely thought about before. Have you ever noticed how sometimes when someone is talking really, really fast, it can seem like they know what they're talking about, even if you don't really understand what they're saying?
Yes, absolutely. I think we've all been in situations where we felt a bit intimidated or impressed by someone who can speak quickly and confidently. It's as if their rapid-fire delivery somehow equates to a higher level of intelligence.
Right, exactly. It's like we automatically assume that if someone can talk fast, they must have a lot going on upstairs. But is that really true? Studies show that people often associate fast talking with intelligence and confidence because it can make the speaker seem more knowledgeable and in control. But as we'll discuss in this podcast, there's more to effective communication than just speaking quickly.
Exactly. I think it's important to remember that communication is all about conveying information clearly and effectively, and sometimes speaking too fast can actually hinder that process. If someone is talking so quickly that we can't keep up with their train of thought, we're less likely to understand their message or be persuaded by their arguments.
That's a great point. It's like trying to drink from a fire hose. The information is coming at you so fast that you can't possibly absorb it all. And when we can't understand what someone is saying, we tend to tune them out, or even worse, misinterpret their message.
It appears that while speaking quickly can grab our attention, it can also make the speaker seem nervous or flustered, which can actually undermine their credibility.
Yeah.
If someone is talking so fast that they're stumbling over their words or running out of breath, it can make them seem less confident and less trustworthy.
That's so true. It's like when you're giving a presentation, you start speaking really fast because you're nervous. It can actually make you seem less prepared and less knowledgeable, even if you know your material inside and out.
Right. And it's not just about the speed itself, it's also about the clarity and articulation of your words. If you're speaking so fast that your words are blurring together or you're not enunciating properly, people won't be able to understand you no matter how smart you are.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like trying to read a book where all the letters are jumbled together. Your brain can't process the information effectively. So clarity and articulation are just as important as speed when it comes to effective communication.
Absolutely. I think another important aspect of this is the audience you're speaking to. If you're talking to someone who's familiar with the topic, you might be able to speak a bit faster and use more technical jargon.
Hmm,
But if you're talking to someone who's new to the subject, it's important to slow down, use simpler language, and make sure they're following along.
that's a really good point. I think it's easy to forget that communication is a two-way street. We need to be mindful of our audience and adjust our speaking style accordingly so that we can ensure that our message is being received and understood.
It appears that speaking too quickly can also lead to misunderstandings and misinterpretations. If we're not careful, people might take our words out of context or misinterpret our tone, which can lead to all sorts of problems.
Oh, definitely. I think we've all experienced that before, where someone has misinterpreted something we've said because we're speaking too quickly or not clearly enough.
Yeah.
It can be really frustrating, especially if it leads to a conflict or disagreement.
Right. And it's not always easy to correct those misunderstandings once they've happened. So it's really important to be mindful of our speed and clarity from the very beginning of a conversation so that we can avoid those potential pitfalls.
I completely agree. I think it's also worth mentioning that different cultures have different norms around speaking speed. In some cultures, speaking quickly is seen as a sign of intelligence and enthusiasm, while in other cultures it's seen as rude or disrespectful. So it's important to be aware of those cultural differences and adjust our communication style accordingly.
That's a really important point. I think it highlights the fact that communication is not just about the words we use, but also about the nonverbal cues that we send through our tone of voice, body language, and facial expression.
Exactly. And all of those nonverbal cues can be affected by our speaking speed. So it's something we need to be very mindful of, especially when we're communicating with people from different cultures or backgrounds.
It appears that speaking quickly can sometimes be a sign of nervousness or insecurity. For example, if someone is feeling anxious or self-conscious, they might start speaking faster as a way of trying to get their words out before they lose their train of thought.
Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah,
I think we've all been there before, where we feel like we need to rush through what we're saying because we're worried about being judged or interrupted.
right. And while that's a perfectly natural reaction, it's not always the most effective way to communicate. When we speak too quickly because we're nervous, it can actually make us seem less confident and less credible.
That's a great point. It's like when you're trying to explain something complicated and you start speaking really fast because you're worried about confusing the other person, it can actually make them more confused because they can't keep up with what you're saying.
Exactly. So it's important to find that balance between speaking clearly and confidently while also being mindful of our speed and making sure that we're not rushing through our words.
I think another important thing to consider is the purpose of our communication. If we're simply trying to convey information like giving directions or explaining a procedure, then speaking quickly might not be a problem. As long as we're speaking clearly and articulating our words properly, people should be able to understand us.
But if we're trying to persuade someone or make an argument, then speaking too quickly can actually work against us. If we're trying to convince someone of something, we need to give them time to process our words and consider our points.
That's a really good point. It's like when you're watching a commercial and the announcer is speaking really fast, trying to cram as much information as possible into a short amount of time. You're less likely to remember what they said or be persuaded by their message.
Right. But if the announcer speaks at a more moderate pace and emphasizes key points, you're more likely to pay attention and be influenced by their argument.
So it seems like the key takeaway here is that there's no one-size-fits-all answer to the question of whether speaking fast makes you sound smarter. It really depends on the context, the audience, and the purpose of the communication.
Exactly. And it's important to be mindful of all of these factors when we're speaking so that we can communicate effectively and make sure that our message is being received and understood.
So now let's shift gears and discuss some practical tips for speaking clearly and confidently without feeling the need to rush.
It appears that one of the most fundamental aspects of clear communication is something we often take for granted: breathing.
You mean like just inhaling and exhaling?
Yeah.
How does that relate to sounding intelligent?
It's more than just breathing to stay alive. It's about using your breath to support your voice and control your pace. When we're nervous or trying to speak quickly, we tend to take shallow breaths from our chest, which can make our voice sound strained and breathless.
So how should we be breathing when we speak?
The key is to practice diaphragmatic breathing, which involves breathing deeply from your abdomen. Imagine filling your belly with air like a balloon. This type of breathing provides a steady stream of air, which allows you to speak with more volume, power, and control.
That makes sense. I've heard singers talk about diaphragmatic breathing. What are some other techniques we can use to improve our clarity?
Another crucial aspect is articulation, which is all about pronouncing each syllable of a word clearly and distinctly. Many people tend to mumble or slur their words together, especially when they're speaking quickly.
I'm definitely guilty of it. Sometimes I tend to rush through words, especially when I'm excited or trying to get a point across quickly.
It's a common habit, but it can make it difficult for others to understand us. One way to improve articulation is to practice tongue twisters, which are phrases designed to challenge our pronunciation skills.
Like Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. I always mess that one up.
Exactly. Tongue twisters might seem silly, but they force us to slow down and pay attention to the way we're forming sounds. Another helpful tip is to practice speaking in front of a mirror so we can observe our mouth movements and make adjustments as needed.
So we've covered breathing and articulation. What about pacing? How can we find the right rhythm and flow in our speech?
Pacing is all about finding a comfortable speed that allows your listeners to follow your train of thought without feeling overwhelmed or lost. It's important to vary our pace throughout a conversation, speeding up for moments of excitement or emphasis, and slowing down for complex ideas or important details.
So it's not just about speaking slowly all the time. It's about finding a natural rhythm that keeps the listener engaged.
Exactly. Think of it like listening to music. A song with a constant tempo can become monotonous, but a song with variations in tempo keeps us interested and engaged.
That's a great analogy. I never thought about it that way before.
It appears that pauses are also an essential element of good pacing. We often feel the need to fill every silence with words, but pauses can actually enhance our communication by giving our listeners time to process information and anticipate what we're going to say next.
So it's like taking a breath in a musical phrase. It creates a sense of anticipation and allows the music to breathe.
Precisely. Strategic pauses can also be used to emphasize key points, create dramatic effect, and add a touch of humor to our delivery.
I can see how that would work. It's like when a comedian pauses for a beat before delivering a punchline. It builds suspense and makes the joke funnier.
Exactly. Pauses can be just as powerful as words when used effectively.
So we've talked about breathing, articulation, pacing, and pauses.
Mm.
Are there any other techniques we can use to sound smarter without speaking too fast?
One important aspect is intonation, which refers to the rise and fall of our voice as we speak. A monotone voice can make even the most fascinating topics sound boring, while a varied intonation can make our speech more engaging and dynamic.
So it's like adding different notes to a melody.
Yeah.
It creates a more interesting and expressive sound.
Exactly. When we vary our intonation, we can emphasize certain words, convey emotions, and make our speech more persuasive.
Are there any specific techniques we can use to improve our intonation?
One simple exercise is to practice reading aloud with exaggerated intonation. Pretend you're an actor delivering a dramatic monologue or a news anchor reporting a breaking news story. This will help you become more aware of the natural rises and falls in your voice.
That sounds like fun. I'll have to try that.
Another helpful tip is to listen to recordings of skilled speakers, such as podcasters, TED Talk speakers, or audiobooks. Pay attention to how they vary their pitch, tone, and rhythm to create a compelling and engaging delivery.
So it's like studying the techniques of a master painter. We can learn a lot by observing how they use different brushstrokes and colors.
It appears that choosing the right words is another key aspect of effective communication. While it's tempting to use big, impressive words to sound smarter, it's more important to use language that is clear, concise, and appropriate for our audience.
So it's not about using the biggest words in the dictionary. It's about using the right words to convey our message effectively.
Exactly. If we use language that is too complex or technical, our listeners might tune us out or feel intimidated. But if we use language that is simple and relatable, they're more likely to understand and engage with what we're saying.
So it's like choosing the right tool for the job. We wouldn't use a hammer to tighten a screw. We need to select words that fit the context and purpose of our communication.
Precisely. And it's important to remember that clarity doesn't have to be boring. We can still use vivid language imagery and storytelling to make our speech more interesting and memorable.
So it's like finding the sweet spot between simplicity and eloquence. We want to be clear and concise, but we also want to be engaging and captivating.
Exactly. It's all about finding that balance and using our words to create a powerful and impactful message.
Well, these tips have been incredibly helpful. I feel like I'm already starting to think more consciously about my speaking style and how I can improve my communication skills.
That's great to hear. I think the most important thing is to be mindful of our communication habits and to constantly seek ways to improve. We're all works in progress, and there's always room for growth.
I completely agree. And the more we practice and experiment with different techniques, the more confident and effective communicators we'll become. We're wrapping up our discussion on speaking speed and how to sound smart without talking a mile a minute.
Over the last two parts, we've busted some myths about fast talking and explored techniques like breathing articulation and intonation for effective communication.
We've learned that it's not about how fast you talk, but how well you convey your message.
Exactly. And now we'll focus on practical exercises and resources to further develop your speaking skills and find your own voice.
Sounds great. What kind of exercises can help us improve our pacing and clarity?
One effective exercise is recording yourself speaking. This allows you to become an objective listener and identify areas for improvement.
I guess listening to ourselves can be a bit cringy, but it's probably the best way to pinpoint our weaknesses.
It is. When you listen back, pay attention to your speed, clarity, intonation, and pauses. Ask yourself, do I sound rushed? Are my words clear? Is my voice engaging or monotonous?
It appears that this self-analysis can be a real eye-opener.
Absolutely. Another exercise is practicing speaking at different speeds. Experiment with talking slightly faster and slower. Observe how it affects your clarity and comprehension.
This reminds me of musicians practicing scales. It helps them develop dexterity and control over their instrument.
That's a great analogy. Just like musicians practice scales, speakers can practice speed variations to improve their control over their voice.
What about resources? Are there any books, websites, or apps you recommend for improving speaking skills?
There are plenty of excellent resources available. For books, I recommend Talk Like TED by Carmine Gallo. It provides practical tips for delivering engaging presentations.
I've heard good things about that one. Any suggestions for websites or apps?
The Toastmasters International website offers valuable resources and tips for public speaking. You can also find helpful apps like Orai and Umo that provide real-time feedback on your speaking habits.
Those sound incredibly useful. It appears that technology can really assist us in honing our communication skills.
It definitely can, and don't underestimate the power of simply having conversations with others. Engage in discussions with friends, family, or colleagues, and actively listen to their feedback.
Speaking of feedback, it's always beneficial to have someone else listen to us practice and provide constructive criticism.
Absolutely. Ask a trusted friend or language partner to give you honest feedback on your speed, clarity, and overall delivery. They can offer insights you might not notice yourself.
Having an outside perspective can be invaluable. It's like having a coach who can guide us and point out areas for improvement.
It is. And remember, practice makes progress. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Embrace them as opportunities to learn and grow.
That's a great point. It's all about continuous improvement and striving to become the best communicators we can be.
Now let's have some fun and put our knowledge to the test with a little challenge.
I love challenges. What do you have in mind?
I'm going to say the classic tongue twister. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog, first at lightning speed, and then at a slower, more deliberate pace.
Sounds interesting. Let's hear it.
Here goes at lightning speed. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog.
Wow, that was incredibly fast. I could barely catch any of the words.
Now listen to the difference when I slow down and enunciate clearly. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog.
That was much clearer and easier to understand. It really highlights the importance of pacing and articulation.
It does. It's a simple demonstration, but it proves that speed isn't everything. Clarity and comprehension are crucial for effective communication.
So the takeaway message is clear. Speaking quickly might grab attention, but it won't make you sound smarter if people can't understand you.
Precisely. Focus on clear articulation, deliberate pacing, and engaging intonation, and you'll be well on your way to becoming a more effective communicator.
Well, that brings us to the end of our exploration into the world of fast talking. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of English Podcast Flow.
We've learned that speaking speed is just one element of effective communication.
Clarity, articulation, pacing, intonation, and choosing the right words are all equally important.
Remember, practice makes progress. So keep practicing, keep learning, and keep those conversations flowing.
And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends.
Until next time, keep those conversations flowing.
Goodbye.
If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. It really helps our channel grow and reach more English learners like you. By subscribing, you'll never miss a new episode, and by liking the video, you're letting us know you want more helpful content. Thank you for your support. It means so much to us.